Is it mostly genetics, or is it mostly the choices that we make on a daily basis? And now looking at this study done in 2025, this was performed in the United Kingdom, and the question that they were asking was, is the environment or is genetics the primary result of, say, premature death or early aging? And this was done with over 500,000 subjects. And essentially what they came down to with all the numbers that they gathered, which had a whole host of other data and variables that they were looking at as well. And what they found was that the lifestyle of these individuals accounted for 17% of the variation of early death, while genetics played a much smaller role, around 2%. And so again, that doesn't mean that genetics don't play a role at all, but rather we start with our own predisposition genetically. But based on the choices that we make or in the environment that we're in, that is going to have an effect on whether those genes get expressed in one way or another. And so you can still have the predisposition, but based on the choices that you make daily is either going to increase or decrease your risk. And so a study done here in the United States, they looked at all of these factors as well, and they showed that 7 out of the 10 leading causes of death are from chronic diseases, and more than half of Americans suffer from one or more. And this is important because when you think about who is at risk, it is not entirely what you would think. So people that are over 65 have a 90% chance of having, or rather 90% of people over 65 have one or more chronic disease, which again is part of the 7 out of 10 leading causes of death. But then when you look at it from 35 to 64, 75% have them. And now even more surprisingly, especially to me, is looking at individuals from 18 to 34, 60%. And so one of the things that I came across as well when I was reading about this is, yes, of course, as I stated earlier, genetics play a role, but they actually play the majority of the role when, say, you're in your last quarter of your life. However, up until that point, you have more of the control whether or not you're at risk of getting these things. And that's because the factors that are a part of our lifestyle in our circumstances that increase the risk are things like chronic stress, not sleeping well, again, not taking care of our body, having habits like drinking excessively or smoking, as well as not having any practices that you can turn to or have tools in your disposal to mitigate some of these personal and circumstantial life events that cause more stress on ourselves, and we don't really do anything to counteract it. Now, there are some things that are out of our control to a certain degree, and as I stated earlier about the blue zones of some places being in poverty, of how that is a low predictor of life expectancy. There are multiple reasons for that, and we can't always control how much money we make. And so when I'm looking at some of these other statistics about the association between income and life expectancy, you can see that as income increases, so does your life expectancy pretty significantly, actually. But even with that, right, we may not be able to double our income or triple our income across our lifespan. But the thing is that is most interesting to me about this is one of the main factors that is correlated to high income and life expectancy is the fact that majority of the times that high income is also associated with higher education. So with that in mind, I would put a little bit more of the importance on higher education than the disposable income necessarily. Because while having a higher income does give you greater access to healthcare and to be able to pay for those healthcare costs, as well as being in more suitable environments. So if you can afford living outside the city and the suburbs so that there's less air pollution, less of this, toxicity in our environment, or even if you're living in a older house or maybe a rundown area of town and presence of mold or all these other things, of course, are absolutely a factor. But even as it relates to some of the healthcare costs, I find it interesting because as you develop a healthier lifestyle, your personal healthcare costs are actually going to go down. So even the necessity of having a higher income to pay for those things actually kind of mitigates itself, because with the daily actions that you perform to keep your body healthy and keep yourself as healthy as possible, you now are taking care of your immune system in a way so that it has enough strength and energy to fight off the things that we are naturally exposed to all the time, every day, no matter where you live or where you go. And the other association that's important as it relates to higher income and even more so higher education is that the individuals that have more knowledge generally do not partake in those same activities that I listed before. And the other thing that I thought as it relates to that was interesting about the blue zones was that the individuals that even had alcohol, primarily it was red wine, but the other important factor is that it was always, or for the most part, done in a community environment. So whenever they did have alcohol, which was in moderation, it was red wine, and it was always with family or friends in a socially engaging environment. So there was this, and not totally, but almost as if there was a balancing out of these other good habits that are stress relieving and positive and really productive for a sense of well-being, mixed with a little bit of this other activity, which is not the best, but within moderation doesn't have as much of effect on our health. And so to finish off everything that we had talked about now and put everything into perspective in the most digestible way, chronic diseases like heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes are highly preventable, with experts estimating that up to 80% of these conditions can be avoided through lifestyle modification, such as healthy eating, physical activity, and avoiding tobacco. And similarly, and this is the part that I thought was really interesting as well, especially as it relates to these chronic diseases that affect the majority of the population, that things like heart disease and stroke are 80% of the time preventable by managing blood pressure, improving your diet, and moving a little bit more. And so same thing with diabetes, and more importantly, the thing that I thought was even more surprising, especially because my idea of something like cancer, which was primarily genetic, and you can live the healthiest lifestyles you can, and there are times that people are still going to get it. And I don't mean to say that you can avoid all risks all the time, but they say that approximately 40% of cancers can be prevented just simply by avoiding tobacco, reducing your alcohol consumption, and maintaining a healthy weight. Going back to the topic that I discussed about the obesity and how much more at risk you are when you are not managing your body weight, and also by not managing your calorie consumption in the foods that you're choosing to eat. And so, with all that in mind, here are some of the key takeaways so that you can pull all of this together and think about it in terms of how we started in the blue zones and what their advices, right, were, I guess I'll say it that, or the recommendations of the blue zones compared to some of the other studies and statistics that I also provided. So all in all, the best things that you can do starting today to lower your risk of getting a chronic disease, but also something like type 2 diabetes, or even if you're pre-diabetic, can actually reverse that process and make yourself less likely to get that again in the future. And so it's to stop smoking or never start, reduce your body fat, and maintain a healthy body weight. And here's the most important: increase your fitness, which means add muscle mass, increase your strength, and most importantly, increase your endurance. Because the greatest predictor of longevity is what's called your VO2 max, which essentially is how well does your cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory system work. So the more in shape you are, the greater your chance of living a longer, healthier, happier life, as well as managing stress. So having tools at your disposal that you could use, because life is going to happen, you're going to get stressed. But what do you do after that? Do you have things that you can perform or partake in that helps manage and reduce that stress after it starts, rather than letting it run wild? As well as practicing spirituality, because even with that, there is a sense of community and a social atmosphere, a social circle that can be involved with that. Now, that's for people that go to church. I personally don't go to church, but I do very much so believe in spirituality and having a purpose in life and feeling like you're connected to something that's bigger than yourself. And so I hope this all has been helpful for you. And like it was for me when I first started learning about these things, it made me feel confident that I had more control over my circumstance and my life going forward than what I had previously felt. And so if you're somebody that feels like you need a little extra nudge, I have a link in the description to help you make slow, gradual changes that incorporates all of these same principles that we talked about in this video into your life, so that it's not just a short, quick fix to make quick results, but rather in a slow, gradual way to make these changes a part of your life and your lifestyle, so that you can have them for the rest of your life. And so, like I said, I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next video.